Hello, everybody. Welcome to College Knowledge, Learning Allies podcast for college students who are blind or visually impaired. This podcast brings together sort of the three elements of Learning Ally, and that's mentors, resources, and community. I'm your co host, Rashad Jones, blind mentor, independent living coach, and lifelong learner. Starting or maintaining relationships can seem easy for everyone else. But when you're blind or visually impaired, what do you do when you can't recognize someone's face? How do you greet a professional you don't know? And how do you deal with dating and desire? Today, we'll be discussing these topics and many more, all related to developing and maintaining and navigating those professional, personal, and intimate relationships. I'll be talking with my co-host, Brian Duarte. How you doing, Brian?
Very well, thank you.
Great. And we are so delighted to have um, the guest speaker for today, who is Caitlin Mongillo. Now, she's a blind mentor in our program. She's also a social worker who works with some of the most vulnerable people in our population, helping them to maintain their independence and really helping them find employment and just really be confident about who they are, really excelling in their lives. So, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us. How are you this evening?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
No problem. No problem. No problem.
Awesome.
All
Thank you,
right.
Caitlin. Thank you, Rashad, for that awesome introduction. As Rashad talked today, mentioned in the introduction, we will be discussing three major topics of relationships. And the first one is professional, personal, and romantic or intimate relationships. The first one we're going to start with today is going to be professional relationships, and really what does this look like, and how do we navigate that when some of the things that society does or social society says that we should do to get along. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first thing we're going to kind of discuss is, what is it like when we introduce ourselves to someone and they want to throw out a handshake? Where do we kind of start with that? I'm blind. Maybe I don't see them putting their hand out. Is there any ways that we can give some tips on how to do this, or when to do it, or when not to do this?
Um,
So I always sort of I'm totally blind. I have light perception only, so I can't see if someone's reaching out their hand to shake. And I know when I started my job, my current position about 6.5 years ago, this was really challenging for me because a lot of times in college and graduate school and these kinds of things, you're not really having to shake professors' hands or fellow students' hands. So I
Mm-hmm.
sort of always recommend to people, and something that I do for myself is if I'm being introduced to someone, I say, hi, my name is Caitlin Mongillo, and I'll actually extend my hand in the general direction that I think they're facing, that their voice is coming from. So this way, I'm putting it out there first, and it's on them to kind of pick up my hand and shake. And I sort of do that as general practice. If someone says to me, oh, I don't shake hands or something, to say, oh, okay, no problem. And I just put my hand down. But this way I'm sort of jumping the gun and trying to get there ahead of them. If they have their hand out already and I don't see it, it doesn't matter because they pretty quickly, maybe there's a second of awkwardness, but they'll pretty quickly, take my hand if I'm extending it to them. Because it is somewhat awkward, sometimes you can't really tell how close you are to someone. So I definitely overextend my hand. And there's always that
Mm-hmm.
slightly awkward moment where maybe accidentally touch someone on the stomach or, like in a weird sort of way. And you just I don't really have an easy answer for that one,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Awesome. Well, you bring up two good points that I would like to touch on. And the first one I'm going to throw at my partner here, Rashad. So the dynamic of male and female, right? We have this kind of thing where it's common that men shake hands, right? So is that something that women do as well, Caitlin?
Yes.
Okay.
Generally, it's a great question. If I'm meeting someone in a business setting, whether they be male, female, I will always offer to shake hands. The relationship is different if it's a coworker from a different company, but someone in the field and you've met before, maybe then you don't shake hands and you'll do like a hug, or like I've even seen women coworkers, like I'll kiss you on the cheek or something like that. But generally the first time, I always think, for me at least, rule of thumb is always to offer the hand no matter who the other person is.
I agree. I think that it's very important that you kind of follow social norms when in a professional setting. You stand up straight, if you will. You make eye contact, right? This is something that society says that we're supposed to do in a professional setting. You're supposed to make eye contact, but how do you do that as a blind person? Is that something that you all do in your normal day-to-day professional networking situations, Caitlin?
Generally, the way I kind of get around that is I'm very cognizant to look in someone's direction. So even if my gaze is slightly off to the right, off to the left, I sort of try to hone in on where their voice is coming from and make sure that I'm at least facing their direction. Of course, I can't, unfortunately, meet their eyes. But the same thing in like a presentation. If you're at a conference or something, it's important to, kind of look in the general direction of the speaker. And some of us will go to these conferences where you're sitting at small round tables in like a large ballroom or something, so you can't actually tell like which way the front of the room is or where the speaker's coming from. So I'll sometimes ask someone like, oh hey, is the front of the room off to the right, off to the left? So at least I look like I'm putting in the effort of trying to be attentive to the speaker, even if it's a room of 100 people, because it's good courtesy to them, but also I think it's less socially isolating for the people around you who can see. If your back is totally to the action, it looks a little awkward.
Absolutely. That brings up a good point.
Is it just me, or if you're like in a room where like maybe the tables or the chairs aren't facing where the speaker is, do you guys like turn in your chair like so that you can kind of face that way, or do you turn the whole chair? Am I the only one who kind of like turns halfway and does all these weird body things? Is that just me, or what do y'all do? Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
I'll tell you right now, I don't like when my neck gets a crank in it from having my neck turned to the right because my chair is facing to the left. So I'm probably with you, brother. I'll turn my whole chair, turn my whole body, and kick back, because if it's going to be a long one, I definitely don't want my neck getting stiff because I'm looking to the right.
Yeah, so sometimes those seating arrangements can be a little awkward. So that's just really what I was talking about. So okay, glad I do all kinds of stuff. So
awesome. So the other kind of social norm that I think it's important, blind or not, that we kind of keep in mind is we have the whole standing up, we have the whole making eye contact, if you will, or at least looking in the general direction of the person who's speaking or the person you're interacting with. I think that's really the key here, is that we're not kind of extending an ear to them, we're giving them our attention. I think that's just a matter of respect. Would you both agree with that we're just kind of respecting the person that we're speaking with enough to give them our attention by pointing our body at them, letting our physical body language kind of complement our verbal language in that aspect?
Absolutely.
Okay. And kind of the other thing that I think is really important, and Rashad and Caitlin, is what would you say about personal and kind of boundaries, if you will? So there is a boundary, right? You don't want to be, like, I think what we call it nowadays is being in someone's bubble, right? You don't want to be in someone's bubble when you're having these encounters. Is there like a safe distance for these conversations? If it's busier room, do we get closer? But how close? Do we hug? Do we what is that? How do we navigate that as a blind person?
Well, I would just say, if I can, it's just you really have to. I think it's best to be a little bit more professional than you might normally be in a situation. I'm thinking here of like job interviews or meeting some staff members or professors or things like that, people who you'll be working with in a professional capacity. So, this is just where I'm coming from. But I think it's important to portray that you're a little bit more professional than you would normally be, and then allow them to, give you the cue to relax a little bit. I think sometimes people start off nowadays, some of us start off a little too personal, a little too informal. And while you definitely want to get to that point in some cases, it's really important to make sure that you're respecting that this is a professional situation until it's otherwise dictated. Or, it can be kind of tricky for some people to understand those social cues and those social norms. So just thinking about those people, I think that's really important to point out.
I agree with you. I think that, a lot of times you want to be, when you're in a business setting, you want to be more professionally minded. And I know for me, a lot of times, it really depends if it's like a coworker or a colleague, someone I don't know that I'm meeting for the first time, I won't ever hug them. I'll always just shake their hand. But if it's someone, from a different who works in the field I've met maybe a couple times at conferences or at meetings, or we've had some interaction, or maybe they've, changed jobs or something, then, maybe you do hug them. But I always generally let um, other people take the lead, because I don't ever want to go and go in for the hug and have them, kind of not expect it. Um, so I sort of approach it that way. And I think, Brian, your point about the bubble is really, really good. And I do find that, even for myself, really challenging, because I can't really see at all where they are in time and space. So I know a lot of times what I'll do is, on the initial meeting, when doing the handshake, I kind of try and um, stay in one spot, unless we're, it's a you have to move from point A to point B, because I know, at least initially, I was arm's length away from that other person. And that's generally a fairly socially acceptable distance to be, in a professional relationship. Of course, that changes if you're in a noisy room and maybe you have to incline your head a little bit to, hear what someone's saying. But I feel like generally, if you can see, or even if you can use the initial handshake, to kind of gauge, like, staying about an arm's length away from someone is generally comfortable for most people.
You both kind of make me think of something, and this is probably a little bit more along the lines of someone who's maybe not done this as often, or maybe isn't kind of quite the extrovert as some of us are. But, like, is it my responsibility to make someone comfortable with my blindness, or is it something that the way that I position myself and the way that I carry myself and conduct myself will kind of, like, make that all come together? Is that, like, is there something that I need to be doing or saying to make them comfortable? Can you give me some kind of feedback on that?
I feel like that's the $1 million question, right? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like if there was an easy answer, we would all be very rich and a lot more comfortable, probably, with ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, I ask it as a provoking question, but I ask it from experience, because I'll tell you, as a personal testimony, if you will, when I was kind of newly blind and kind of meeting people for the first time, I always was trying to, quote unquote, prove myself, right? Prove myself as what? Well, what I was trying to do was I was trying to prove myself as a man, a father, as a person, a professional, but then to do it in such a way to where they would look past the blindness. And really, what I learned over time was that they didn't need to look past the blindness. The blindness was part of me, but what they needed to see was me first.
I think that's really powerful. And I know for me, the job I have right now is the one that um it's my first job that I've had after graduate school. So when I started, I was 24, maybe 25. I was pretty young. It was my first ever, in air quotes, big girl job, where it wasn't like, I'm a camp counselor or something like that. Um, and I kind of struggled with the same thing initially, and kind of feeling, even though I'd been blind all my life, I kind of felt like meeting these new people who are all these, business people, and all they're going to see is, my guide dog, or the fact that my eyes don't, focus straight, and they're not going to listen. They're not going to see the worth in me being here. And I think it's also, even too, just a matter of time. And as you do it more and more, and you get more comfortable, and you kind of are in these, really, let's be honest, like, these really challenging situations where, you're the new kid in the room, and you don't really know anyone, and it's, mobility wise, maybe difficult, and it's all new people. And you
Mm.
really kind of push yourself And I think as you do it more and more with time, you get more confident in yourself and you get more comfortable. And I know for me, I would always kind of just like the mantra in my head
Mhm.
that, you know, often at the beginning, at least I kind of failed on, but over time it's gotten easier. And it's like, you're meant to be here. You're supposed to be here. You can sit at this table. You can play with these people too. Like you have
Absolutely.
worth no matter, you know, what you are, what you're
Mhm.
not. Like you're here because of your intelligence or your job or, you know, whatever, you know what you're talking about. And, you know, if all they can see is you being blind, like they're missing out on a lot. So
Absolutely. And I think that this is a topic that we could all three probably talk about for hours because it's very important that we do know how to conduct ourselves in a very professional manner. We're all aspiring engineers or social workers or lawyers or doctors or I mean just anything out there, and to kind of to compete in today's market, we really need to have these skills. And some people can say, "Oh, well, I'm blind; those don't apply to me," but really they do, because they're really more about respect than they are anything else. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and transition into the personal networking space. So, when we talk about meeting people personally, we're not really always going to be doing the handshake. We're not really going to be doing the eye contact as rigorous as we would in a professional setting, but there are still some key things to keep in mind. And also there's that aspect of, where do I find these people? How do I know if they're interesting to me? And what does this setting look like? Is this something that I'm going to be doing at work? Is this at a restaurant? Do I have to go somewhere special? Like, what does this whole thing look like? So where are some places that would how do I get involved with people at a personal level? Is there a place? How do I get involved in general?
Well, I would say as college students, you know, you go to your classes and things like that, and that even can be depending on the nature of the class. You can probably find some people who you connect with on some level, maybe who you could have lunch with or something like that, just by listening and even some of the interactions that you may have in some of your classes.
Mhm,
I'm thinking
mhm,
here about maybe some general ed classes. I remember one time I was in a like a American politics class, something like that, or it was some sort of civics class or something. Anyway, uh, political science or something. So what was interesting to me was, so the classes can be kind of long. So, but I would have questions about certain things, and so I'd ask questions, and then there was somebody um, who always asked a bunch of questions, or they kept on prolonging the time. So the girl behind me, I remember she'd like, "Oh my gosh, like is she still talking?" And I'm like, "Yep, still talking." And we struck up a pretty cool friendship for that semester. I mean, she was like my best my best friend in that class because we ended up. This sounds really bad, but we ended up complaining together about like how long the class was, or like how difficult it was when we didn't have really any assignments and we just had tests and things, and it was really interesting. So we made fast friends. So just even if you're able to pick up on some of their mannerisms and things like that, and y'all share similar interests and things like that, then I think that's
mhm,
one way you could do it. Um,
mhm, mhm.
so that was me. What about you, Caitlin? What do you think? Or yeah,
I think that's an awesome point, you know, like it sounds so silly, but complaining over like mutually complaining is an awesome way
yes.
to make
Oh my
friends.
gosh.
um, but I do also I know most of our listeners are maybe college students or graduate students, and I think just looking, you know, locally, like looking on your campus, normally campuses have a lot of really great either like intramural sports or clubs or different organizations based on a whole host of interests, from, you know, political parties that you affiliate with, to drawing, to theater, to really liking to play frisbee, to doing some kind of community service activity or something like that. So I would say, you know, if you're in college or you're in graduate school, definitely look no further than your campus community, because it's one of the easiest ways to make friends is to surround yourself with people that already have something in common with you. So when I was in college, I was an English major. I loved reading. I still love reading. So I joined the book club, you know, and that was those were people who had an interest in common with me even before I met them. I knew that they were going to be readers, and that, you know, if nothing else, we could talk about books. And I also joined like a social justice kind of club, because, you know, I cared about, you know, those sorts of issues, and still do. And I had a particular community service scholarship at my school, so I had to participate in different community service events and things. So I met people through those sorts of different activities who already had, you know, some things in common, to me, which is a great way. I also know that for some of our students, maybe they're commuting to school, or online college programs are now a really big thing. So something that I found really useful is using websites like Meetup. I think it's meetup.com, where you can kind of type in interests and find, like, groups in your area of people that could be any ages, you know, but they have all sorts of different things, like a dog, you know, dog walking clubs to book clubs to square dancing clubs to any kind of thing. And it's sort of the same sort of factor of look for people that care about the same stuff you care about. And that's, you know, I think a really good way, at least initially, of trying to meet folks that are kind of at your same level, I'd say.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and indeed, and I think that you really hit on it perfectly when you just kind of said common interest brings people together. So you think about the friends that you have or that you've had. Really, I think what brings you together is common interests, or in Rashad's case, common differences that you could voice together. There's something very powerful about that in any relationship, and so just putting yourself out there into meetups where you can say, hey, I like to go to stepping on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Maybe somebody else does as well, right? Or hey, I'm an engineer. Maybe I'll find somebody who's an engineer in my classes, right? Or you know, just even beyond that, a church is a great place. If you have a
Yeah.
religion, finding somebody at church, getting involved with small groups at church, and joining clubs. I found that joining clubs was very powerful for me. I got involved early on in student government when I was an undergrad. I served on the undergraduate student government, USG, undergraduate student government for 3 years when I was an undergrad. And I was the Senate president for a while. So getting involved at that level, you start to meet people, and you don't meet just your peers, but you meet like the deans. I remember I'd have dinner and lunch, and the dean actually gave me tickets to an Arizona Diamondbacks game. And it was just because we had built up
Wow.
that relationship through these different involvements that I was in. And then clubs, I created a club called Disabled Athletes and Allies, and it was really just geared to bring people with disabilities together with those with quote unquote no disabilities, and get them involved around something like sports or activity, working out, exercising, gardening. I created a group called Homegrown Devils, and that was all about gardening. And again, we had equal amount of people with disabilities as people without disabilities coming, and they loved it. So really just getting involved is what I'm trying to get at. I think where all of us are really trying to get at, right?
Yeah.
Just understanding that there are differences in people, some visual, some not visual, but they're still just as important, right? Culture, relationship. You're going to have friends, you're going to have people that you're going to meet, they're going to have different cultures. In the professional setting, we talked about those who may want to shake hands and those who may not want to shake hands, and that can be for a lot of reasons. Knowing that there's this very big important thing, and it's gender identity. Understanding, does somebody want to talk as a man, as a woman, or as some other gender agnostic, if you will, identity, but being cognizant of those things in those people.
I think all this stuff that Brian and Rashad, you guys hit on, is perfect for making connections. But the one other tool that I know friends of mine have used in the past to kind of reach out and sort of form like new friendships, new relationships, is actually like even looking as far as social media. So if you look on Facebook, you can find like nearby events in your town, if that's a carnival or if that's some sort of like chicken wing eating contest or a concert or
Mm,
something like that.
mm,
And
mm,
you
mm,
know,
mm. Right. Definitely.
But that's like a cool way too to find something that even if you're not interested, it's like, okay, well, it's a way to get out there. And even, the getting out there, I think, is the biggest thing. Like, just be a little bit brave and, stick yourself outside the box to meet people. They're not going to come to you. You have to kind of do your part to go to them too.
And I'm really glad you said that, because getting out there can be really challenging. I know for me, sometimes, believe it or not, Brian, sometimes it was kind of something that brought me a little bit of apprehension, because I'm like, little practical things like, how am I going to get there? That was always a thing. So I think that's really something I wanted to bring up, and that's really important about making those friends and acquaintances early on, even at the classroom level, finding those people, seeking them out there, because that's going to be a real issue. You might not know where everything is on campus, or heaven forbid, if it's an off-campus event, how you're going to get there. So I think really doing your best to, in those groups, and one group that you guys did not mention was like a music organization. I'm a little partial because that was my thing in college, as well as I mean, on a collegiate level, like in terms of like the fraternity that I was a part of, am still a part of, just as an alumni now. But being involved in that, and then also on a from a like a religious standpoint, I was in a gospel choir at my college, and the thing was, I loved it because it was more than just, at that time at gospel choir, it was really something where we like had a Bible study and things like that. And so for me personally, like, that faith-based organization was something that held a lot of importance in shaping who I am. And I'm still in touch with some of those people to this day. We have had brunches every year, excluding this New Year, but on New Year's Day, we've always had a brunch for the past like 7 or 8 years. So, these are the kind of relationships that can really be long lasting if you're willing to just step out there even a little bit. Yeah. Talk about long lasting, hopefully.
So I think the first thing I would say is a lot of romantic, intimate relationships, whatever term you want to use, will actually come from, a personal friendship or a shared interest first. Doesn't always, of course, mean that. Like they always say, opposites attract. Um, but it definitely can come from, just being friends with someone. I know that my husband and we met in college, and we were friends first, pretty tight friends for about 2 months before we started dating. And that just came from, we had a mutual friend who introduced us, not to be, boyfriend, girlfriend, but just like, oh, hey, she's new and he's nice. So, it can kind of come from that. You can also find, people are everywhere. People are out there. You can certainly do the online thing if we'll talk about that in a little bit, but
Mhm.
but it can, come from really anywhere. You never know when you're going to meet someone. It could be that, someone in your group in class that you're working on a project with, or it could be, you're walking your dog, or it could be someone that you work with or you commute every day with. And I would just say, I think I would say just be open to possibilities if you want to be in a relationship. But also, I've seen people who kind of get mired in the openness to possibilities. And if it's not happening on the same timeline that they'd like it to, you can get depressed or anxious or upset and say, well, what's wrong with me? Why don't I have a boyfriend? Why don't I have a girlfriend? Why aren't I going on dates and things like that? So it can be discouraging. And I think I would just, I mean, it sounds maybe a little bit trite and overused, but I think there's worth to it that it's going to happen. Like, just like we talked about before, kind of know your worth and that you're super awesome. And someday someone will see that, but, to put yourself out there, to be brave, to go on dates, to, be friendly, to introduce yourself, things like that. And if it's not happening, that doesn't mean it's because you're doing something wrong. It just means it's not happening. And if you're worried you're doing something wrong, ask a friend, or ask your sister, ask your brother, this is how I handled this situation. Would you have done it differently? Be open to that kind of feedback, because maybe, that opinion will help too.
Let me ask this question to both of you. Is there a way to poise myself when I'm looking for a relationship of this type? Is there how should I hang the flag, if you will, and say, hey, I want to try to date. I want to take this relationship from my my music group or my sporting group or my meetup to maybe the next level. Is there a way to kind of position myself or poise myself for that?
Oh, that's a toughie. That's a toughie. I mean, for me, college was just a very, hey, let's just all hang out thing. And I didn't really, not very much, I would say, wasn't really looking for anybody in that regard. I mean, there were times where, something would have been nice, but I just didn't even focus on it because I knew that I was so lacking in that area, contrary to what people might believe about me. But it can be tough. It can really be tough, especially when we consider that, I had a visual impairment. And so I'm like, well, what? No one's going to look at me in that way. That's just always been kind of my default when it comes to that kind of thing. So it was actually kind of a rough one for me.
You touched on the main point of why I asked that question. I'm blind. Nobody's really going to look at me like that. When did you find, or have you found, how to kind of change that? Did it happen in you? Did it happen because of a friend? What really gave you that notion that, hey, yeah, I'm blind, but that doesn't matter?
I think that for me, everything that we've kind of been talking about all centers on the same, relationships are hard. They are not easy at all. They are not easy if you're sighted. They're not easy if you're blind, any kind of relationship. But I think for me, at least, I know that, it's kind of all the same. I have to remember that I have worth, and that, I am much more than just blind, but that's an important part of me. And I have to be okay with, the facets of myself, all of them, the ones that I like and the ones that maybe I don't like as much. And especially in regard to blindness, it's a matter of, remembering and kind of constantly reminding myself, you have a place here in this relationship, in this job, in this family, in this, whatever it is. And there's definitely days. I've been married now for, oh God, almost 7 years. And there's days where
better not forget that.
I better not forget.
Right.
June 8th, 2013.
Okay.
Right.
But there's even days where I'm just like, God, I'm a terrible wife. If I wasn't blind, if I wasn't this, if I wasn't that, my husband would be so much happier with me. So everybody has crappy days, right? You have days where you just feel not okay about who you are. And that's okay to acknowledge that too. And hopefully just, learn from that and let it pass. But I think you attract the attention that you put out. So if you if you're interested in pursuing a romantic relationship, be a little bit confident. And even if you're not, fake it till you make it, you know, put it out there. Like, I'm here, I'm cool with who I am. And, you know, that makes people automatically more comfortable if you seem like you're comfortable in your own skin, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You know, it's about you developing that confidence. And again, I think it goes back to these social interactions and things, but really having making sure that you participate in that stuff is really important, because then it's not only what you do during those interactions, it's about the food that you go and have afterwards, the hangouts that you have even after the official meetings. That's really where a lot of the relationship building takes place, and I think there's a lot of potential for things to possibly escalate or, you know, go further. But another thing that Caitlin, you brought out was just and you guys both said, it's being comfortable with who you are, and all of those types of things. I mean, that can be many different facets and levels, and, you know, different avenues of that, you know, layers to that whole topic. But being confident in who you are can make or break you in that. So just learning to relax, and then, you know, there's inevitably somebody who's going to take notice, and then if you notice somebody that you could kind of you know, think that there's something there between the two of you, then building the courage to say something about it.
Okay, so here we go. I've got some confidence. My friends tell me I need to do it. I'm interested in it, kind of, but let's give it a try. I want to do online dating. Have you ever done this? Is this a thing? Can blind people do that? Should blind people do that? I have friends that have done it. There's thousands of apps out there that do it. What should I do? Should I do it?
I know.
I told you it was going to get challenging. Let's do
it.
it.
I know. So, full disclosure, I haven't dated in
7 years at least.
Well, no, 13 years actually.
Ooh.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm old lady.
Nah.
And so when I started dating my husband, who was then my boyfriend, online dating wasn't really a thing. with like OkCupid and eHarmony and stuff. So I never actually used them, because I wasn't, when I started dating him, I wasn't really looking for a boyfriend. I was just kind of having fun and being 18. But I definitely think, you know, it's the wave of the future, right? Like, there's like you said, Brian, and you're right, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of apps, and I think your mileage is going to vary, certainly, because a lot of them are very, what would you call it, like picture based, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe from what I've talked to, you know, my girlfriends who might be visually impaired or blind, you know, being, you know, really cognizant of like, you know, you being able to write your profile on your own, even if you can't type it into your iPhone, and you want to have your friend or your sister or your, you know, whoever, your coworker, whatever it might be, you know, someone that you feel tight to, and that, you know, is going to help represent you, even if you're not typing it in yourself, but they're doing it. Know what you want to say, have it be your words.
Absolutely.
But then also too, like, you know, if you're curious, you start connecting with a guy or a girl, and like, you know, you want to know what they look like, and that's okay. Like, we're, you know, curious, even if we can't necessarily be vain in like the same definition. So, you know, go back to that
Who
friend and say,
says?
hey,
It's all about equality, right?
exactly. You know, like, hey, is this, what's his look like? Does he, you know, does he have long blonde hair? He looks like a surfer, or maybe, you know, she's a goth, or maybe, you know, he's a punk, or, you know, punk rock kind of style, or she's really short, she's really tall. And, you know, if that matters to you, then awesome. And if it doesn't, awesome. But, you know, I don't think that's a bad thing to kind of have an idea of what the person looks like, you know, because everybody else gets that feedback too. So I think it's okay to know and ask.
Well, before I give my personal story, Rashad, do you have a personal story from this online dating thing, or do you have a perspective of it?
Boy.
Calling you
Oh
out.
gosh.
On the money, Rashad.
Yeah, you definitely are. Okay, so online dating, these apps, I really believe that you should exercise a lot of caution and common sense when you go on these things. According to research, of course, y'all understand that, you know, research suggests that just because these are applications, dating applications, you still should probably may want to think about how you present yourself on them. I mean, whew, a lot of good can come from them. You know, if you're looking for a casual hookup, um, but it can also be a situation where people, number one, are like, "What are you doing on this app? Like, what's wrong with you?" Like, they'll look at your physical appearance, and there are a lot of ignorant people. So when you get on these apps, you're not necessarily going to be finding people who are understanding of people who have disabilities. So that's something that you have to really be ready for. I remember on one app, I posted a picture of myself, and I take a picture of myself, and they're like, "What's wrong with you?" Or, I mean, you can get some really negative feedback from some people. Not
Yeah.
That's not the majority. Now, let me make that clear. That's not the majority. The research indicates that it's not the majority, but you might find one or two people who have a negative view of people who have disabilities, or just are very ignorant and don't understand and aren't looking to understand. So in those instances, I would say it's rough again, but you have to breathe and then come back to it later and figure out, how you want to present yourself. And then when you do that, be very cautious about how you interact with these people. I mean, meetups and things are pretty cool, but you're taking a chance, I would say, that you might not necessarily take in a more traditional setting, depending on what you're looking for. I'll put it to you like that. And then if you're too open, if you're too willing to eager to have somebody, and this can be in a traditional setting too, but I'm thinking of research and okay, stuff that maybe I've encountered, and then stuff that you watch on things like 90 Day Fiance, for instance. You just The world is an interesting place, and I'm not saying don't use them, because then you know the researchers and the other participants might think that I'm being a hypocrite. But what I am saying is, this is a different time than your aunts, uncles, parents, certainly. So, I mean, we're gonna be out there a little bit, so try to have somebody you trust, like, look at the pictures. Number one, to be like, "Hey, what do you think about this person?"
Safety first. Safety first, I think.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this question. I got a question for you. How about this? Do I tell people I'm blind on my profile?
Ooh, good question.
Do I just post a picture? Do I just write this awesome blog, this little post about me and how I love to go hiking every Thursday, because research says that everybody likes to hike. And research also says that everybody likes long walks on the beach and candlelit dinners, right? If I put that on my profile and I don't say I'm blind, when do I tell them I'm blind? Is that something that you got some feedback on? I know my experience, but let me ask you all first, and then we'll move on to the next two little kind of points I want to bring up.
Good question. That's a great question. Well, personally, I do not have it in a profile, so I will just wait until I make a connection with somebody, and then I'll mention it in my personal introduction. And then at that point, I let them know, hey, I have this visual impairment, but I also went to college, have a degree, worked 3 jobs. You know what I mean? And maybe that's the wrong approach. I don't know, because it's kind of like, well, the blindness maybe somewhere in my mind is like a nuisance to somebody else, or it could be a deterrent. So since I know that some people might view it in that way, then I just let them know the reality of it. So that's the way that I've handled it. Caitlin may have something different.
Absolutely. Caitlin, do you have a kind of a perspective? I know that you said you don't really have experience with it, but do you have any feedback?
I do have thoughts, though.
Sure.
Of course, I have thoughts on all things. I agree. I think the only one thing that I would say is that I feel like this is a very much, your mileage may vary, and there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer.
Mhm.
It's really what you want to do and based on an individual thing. So I absolutely think, um, that, uh, Rashad, I think your approach of not saying it until you kind of connect with a person, there's a ton of value and merit to that. Um, and really you're able to present it in a longer form way. But I also think too, if you felt like you wanted to put it out there initially, awesome, all the more power to you, right? um but you can do that. You just have to know that, like, okay, well, if I connect with someone and I match with someone, maybe they're only matching with me because they want to ask all these questions about guide dogs and reading braille and that kind of stuff. So you may encounter that. And you also, it might be hard to know too, well, I'm not getting as many matches on Tinder or Bumble or whatever the other ones are,
Mhm.
because I do have this out there, and are people discriminating against me because of it? So I've seen people kind of vary it, where maybe initially they put it in there, and then after 2 months they take away the blind part and see if that changes. um, so I think, I really think it's a personal opinion more than anything else. I don't think there's one right, one wrong way to handle it.
Well, you took my story, so now I don't have to share it anymore.
Sorry.
No, I think
Sorry.
you bring up the my experience at least. And so a few years back I did try an online dating app, if you will. It's called Coffee Meets Bagel. A bunch of my friends had tried this app called Bumble, and Tinder was becoming a big thing, and so I had tried this thing, and it was accessible. I did it on my iPhone, and it was an app, and it was free for the most part. I think there was some kind of paid thing that you could have paid for more people, or I don't know how it all worked, but I didn't do all that. And I tried that. I had my friends help me with the pictures, and I was able to type my own bio, and I tried it both ways. I tried it first, telling people who I was and about me, and with the picture, left the blindness out. And sure enough, I had matches. Um, but then it became not I wouldn't say as awkward. I don't know how awkward I ever get really, but it became the whole, oh, you're blind, well, how do you live, how do you eat, who takes care of you, who does it? I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go, right? Well, then I was like, well, let's try to avoid that, and let's only try to match with people who are going to be okay with me being blind from the onset, right? And so I switched my profile, and I left most of it there, but then I also put in a spot kind of in it that said, yeah, I became blind when I was 18 due to a motorcycle accident, and I still continue to do what I do, and I'm independent, and it doesn't bother me, so don't let it bother you, or I don't know, something along those lines, right? And again, I got matches, but from the beginning, it was more of what I experienced later. So it wasn't that there wasn't interest. It wasn't that it kept many people. At least I still had people that were interested, blind or not blind. But really, I think what we need to be okay with in a situation like this is people are going to have questions, right? People are going to want to ask. People are not familiar with it. There's a lot of people who probably never even think that blind people would be on an app like that, and it's always interesting when they are. And sometimes we need to be okay with answering questions, and letting them kind of quiz us. I think there's a point where we say, okay, enough is enough, let's get back to what we're here for in the whole grand scheme of things. But I think letting them have that kind of Q&A time is a good thing. I personally liked telling them up front better than I did later on, because then it's that whole, oh yeah, by the way, I'm blind thing, and that's not fun for anybody, and it's really not fair in my opinion. But I think it is important to let them ask the questions, and kind of be okay with it. And I think once they talk to you and get to know you more, that's an okay thing. But that was my experience, and you touched on it. You both touched on it, so I think we covered the online dating thing pretty well. Let's move to this other topic of what do I want and what don't I want. I think these are two questions that people ask me all the time. Well, what are you looking for? What do you want? And my answer is always the same. I'm not 100% sure what I want, but I know what I don't want. And that can be equally as important, right? If you know you don't want somebody who is an alcoholic or someone who does drugs or who smokes or who, you maybe you are looking for someone who has the same faith as you. That could be an important thing, and that could definitely be a deal breaker, right? And then maybe you want somebody, it's not super important to me that they're musical, but that would be cool, right? Having these things in your mind and knowing when to settle and when not to settle. We all talked about this earlier in one of the personal relationship things is having common interests, right? Having things that are in common. Now,
Sure.
some of these are negotiable, others are not. So really having those listed out. So do you have any feedback or perspective on those?
I know for me, if you look at my husband and I, we're very, very different. I'm kind of a little bit wild and a little bit free spirited, or a lot of it free spirited and very loud and excitable and enthusiastic might be a good way of putting it. And he's very, very bright, and he's very, very smart. And he appears to be very serious. So the two of us together is sort of like kind of like an opposites attract sort of thing. And we do have very different interests. He's very interested in politics. I am annoyed by them. He, really likes cars, and I just like that they take me places. But, so there are, we watch, like he likes to watch the news in the morning. I want to just get dressed and go to work. So those are small things that are very different from us, but there's a lot of like the core stuff that's the same. Like he is incredibly kind and generous, and I try to be those things however I'm able. And we both really love our families, and we love dogs, and we love stupid movies that are like bro comedy movies that we can quote over dinner.
Love it.
And so it's a matter of, I think, like you said, Brian, it's what do you want, what do you not want. So it's but I think trying to, if someone has a lot of the core things that you value, some of the smaller stuff that's even surface, like if you can look beyond the surface differences, give those folks a chance, because you might find that they're truly winners for you, and they work so well with you if deeper you connect more than just, oh well, she really likes the New England Patriots and I'm a Jets fan, so it's never gonna work. Like I think you don't want to sell yourself short, and sell someone else short either.
All right. I get that. So now I have this significant other, or SO, as my buddy used to say. Oh, it's my SO. And I never knew what the SO was, and he let me know. So now I have this SO, this significant other. What is the difference between dating and hooking up? Is there a difference? Is this a fine line, or is this a line that should be easily identifiable?
I think that depends on who you talking to and what the day is. Because
anymore, right? Anymore.
Those lines can be, like now I have a friend who is like, we're not dating, but you still like, you cook for them, and then you're buying stuff for their 7-year-old. Like, what do you call it if that ain't dating?
That's dating to me.
So I think it depends on the person. To me, it definitely depends if you are just in it for the physical aspects, shall we say, the physical reward, if you will. Then I think it's just, you're just talking. It's just a hookup. It's just a casual type of thing. But then if there's more involved, the more time that you are able to spend together comfortably, then it's dating.
Okay.
In my
so
opinion.
let me ask this, and Caitlin, I kind of want your perspective on this, with your background in social working and things like that. But okay, now I have this boyfriend, this girlfriend, or this partner, and I want to be intimate, in a physical way. Is this, like, do blind people do that? Like, is that a thing that I should be free to do in kind of a broad sense? Obviously, there could be religion or other factors playing in, and I'm not telling anybody that they have to go do this, full disclaimer. But it is a reality. It is a fact, and it's something that people do. So if I want to be intimate, like what should I, how do I go about that? How do I navigate this so that I am safe, but I'm also doing things, correctly?
So it's a good question, and it's a hard question.
Yep.
But I do think that's really, really important. So I think absolutely, like, I mean, not to be too upfront, but like there are blind parents in this world, and their
Hmm.
children did not just magically land on their doorsteps. Like,
Right.
blind people have sex. They do, and
Hmm.
that's great, and that's fine. Just like sighted people have sex. Like,
Hmm.
it is not a thing that
Mm-hmm.
you should feel like you can't do or shouldn't do, because you're blind or visually impaired.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Correct.
9 times out of 10, like, you're you're able to do that, and you should do that if you feel comfortable. But I think in terms of navigating the waters of taking our relationship from, like, hand holding or kissing or hugging or whatever, or maybe not even
Hmm.
doing any of those things, but wanting to do that, I'd say the
Hmm.
most important thing is communication is key, right? Like, you need to be
Absolutely.
communicating with either your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or, I also don't think we should um, look down on the fact that, like, if you're in college, or even out of college or whatever, a lot of people just hook up. Like, they'll just,
Hmm.
they'll go to a
Mm-hmm.
bar or a club or a concert or wherever, and they'll find a guy or a girl, and they'll make out, and maybe they have sex, maybe they don't. That's fine. But with all of these things, if you're going to be doing something physical with someone, you want to talk it out. Maybe
Hmm.
it's not, we're going to sit down and have this really long important discussion, but just,
Yeah.
just just say.
Make sure you have your dissertation.
But it's really, really important to say to the person that you're with, is this okay? Can I touch you
Yes.
here? Can I kiss you there? Can I do
Mm-hmm.
this to you? And most important is to respect people's boundaries. So if they
Yep.
say no, no always means no. There's no
Consent. That's what
gray.
I was going to
Consent
bring up.
consent
Right.
is the sexiest thing you can ever have with someone else. um
Yes.
and
Yep.
likewise, if you're the person and someone is doing something to you and they're not asking, tell them no. Like, your body
Mm-hmm.
belongs only to you.
Yes.
No one is to touch you, to make you feel uncomfortable, to do anything, like that. And you should feel free to say no. And if they are not respecting it, like, you know, then that's
They're
another
not right for you.
conversation, or you
Hmm.
leave. You
Mm-hmm.
don't ever have to feel like you need to do something to make someone else happy.
I think you need to trademark that little
Yeah.
slogan. Consent is the sexiest thing. Well, how did you say it?
That you can
That you
have
can
with
have with
somebody.
somebody. That is
Exactly.
that is good. You heard it here first, people. So yeah, definitely. And I want to touch on these things, especially for those who maybe are already sexually active, or those who are probably in that area, thinking about it, considering it. Um, Make sure that safety is your first priority. There
Hmm.
are health centers on every campus, whether it's a community college, a university. There's health centers all around towns and cities, and if not, you can definitely find them online that are near you. If you go into any health center, chances are they have condoms that are out there for free. If you need pregnancy tests, hopefully you don't, because you have an education to get. But they also have resources. They have material. They will definitely bring you in and talk to you about the risks, and I was going to say instructions, but not instructions on how to do it, but instructions about like how
Mm-hmm.
to navigate those waters, and how to do that. So definitely
Mm-hmm.
be aware of the risk involved anytime you do something like this. Understand where your resources can be found, and also just be aware of, like I said, who you're with, or not like I said, but like Caitlin said, is be aware of the people you're with, the people you're involving yourself with, and know that consent is the most important thing.
And
So
if
yeah,
I
go
if
for it.
I could, just to kind of add to what you're saying, because as a woman who's visually impaired, um, like, a couple just sort of other things too, like, your student health center, like you said, Brian, that's totally your best resource, but also like a good, good external resource as well within the community is Planned Parenthood. They'll provide like free STD screenings and exams for you if you need. They have condoms there as well. They have the pregnancy blood test that you can take. And normally for people who are in college, maybe you don't have insurance, or you have, your insurance isn't great. So normally it's either free or low cost, Planned Parenthood. And then just, like if you're out and about and you're, going to a party, or you're going to a bar, or you're going to a club, or you're doing whatever, and you are thinking like, hey, I might like to, hook up with someone tonight. Totally fine. Awesome. You do you. But, be careful about things like if you're drinking, be cognizant of, how am I planning to get home? Because you can't consent if you're drunk. Also, if you're a young woman, watch your drink, don't leave it just like sitting out on a bar if you're going to the bathroom or you're going outside. And if you're, you don't have to, certainly, but maybe that's something that you go with a friend to, the bar or the club or whatever, or, even if you're going on a date, have someone like an accountability person that you're checking in with, like, hey, I just got to, the pizza place, I'm meeting so-and-so, or hey, I just got to the bar, and someone who knows where you are, in case you need to reach out for help, even if it's not a consent issue, but just something where you feel uncomfortable. A friend, a family member, someone who can help you get an Uber if you need to, or be there for support. Someone who knows where you're at, I think is a good safety kind of consideration when you're looking into meeting someone for the first time, where you are going to be, out drinking or hooking up or whatever, until you get into a more comfortable relationship.
Absolutely. It sounds like being prepared is really the name of the game in any of these situations, right? Being prepared. So yeah, well, thank you both so much for this time, your perspective, your feedback, and really tackling the fun but hard questions of romantic, personal, and professional networking or relationship building. Rashad, it's always a pleasure. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Same here. Yeah, thank you very much.
Before we go, we would like to thank the Learning Ally staff, funders, and stakeholders for allowing us to start this new venture and creating a podcast. The hosts of the CSP College Knowledge podcast are Rashad Jones, Rachel Greider, and Brian Duarte. Mary Alexander is the program director. The content writer was Kristen Waitucky. Abigail Shaw was responsible for producing and editing the audio. The social media distributor manager is Katie Otaggio. And my name is Brian Duarte. Thank you for joining the College Knowledge podcast. Thank you.